Yeah, it's a great privilege to be opening. Thank you all very much for being here and for having me. And what I thought I'd do is try to get you to imagine an election of the future, an election of, let's say, 15 or 20 years from now. And the reason I want to talk to you about this is because this man has been in the news quite a lot. I think a lot of you know who this is already, don't you? It's not a Bond villain. He looks a bit like one. Eton educated as well, so probably could have been a Bond villain in a different life. But in fact, it's Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica. Oh, well, I was waiting for some booze or something, but it's a pantomime affair. Yeah, boo. So the story of Cambridge Analytica, I'm just going to have him up there staring at you the whole time, by the way, just to sort of freak you out. The story of Cambridge Analytica, you're probably roughly familiar with it, so I'm not going to retell it, but I think it's actually been slightly misunderstood. The short story is, of course, that Cambridge Analytica collected thousands of data points on millions of American citizens, standard stuff from data brokerage companies, most of it purchased, actually, survey data about attitudes, Facebook likes, magazine subscription, car ownership, mortgage levels, 5,000 data points on all these millions of Americans to build up profiles, to understand what really makes them tick, and then to use, especially Facebook, to target those voters, particularly in some key swing states in the US. Now, I don't know whether anybody here, and probably some of you do, work in digital marketing, digital advertising, and I suspect that some of you, when you were reading about this story, 2017, 2018, you're thinking to yourself, we do some of that stuff. It's actually kind of normal what they're doing. Oh my God. Because that's true. Actually, obviously, as many of you will know, data collection, profiling of people, especially through large data brokerage firms, and targeting of people through targeted adverts, micro-targeting on Facebook or elsewhere, has become industry standard, commercially and politically. And actually what they did, frankly speaking, most political parties are doing something pretty similar. Now, forget for a moment the legalities of how certain data types were collected, because that was a lot of the story here. If you look around the world, this is becoming how elections are won and lost. What they actually did, by the way, really that was most important, was to take all these profiles they had of all these Americans and to go over and sit down with the Republican Party, identify swing voters in key states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan in particular, find 11 million of them, and then just relentlessly target them with ads that seem to sort of reflect their interests in life. Did it win an election? Possibly. They might have been slightly better than the Clinton team were, who were doing much the same thing. And they did win those three swing states by less than 1 percentage point, so pretty important, I think. However, I don't think that's the real story here. I think the real story is how elections are changing. And Cambridge Analytica are really just the start of a new way that we're thinking about elections that I think does not bode particularly well. And that's what I want you to try to imagine, because let's say that 20 years ago, let's say 1997, some of you are old enough like me to remember the Tony Blair election of 97. And if I'd have told you back then in 1997 that in 20 years' time elections would be won and lost on a free social media platform called Facebook, which collected data about you, which was then used to target you, you'd have said this is crazy science fiction. You'd have said it's impossible. What's more, you'd have said elections can't work under such conditions. You can't run an election with micro-targeted adverts and all this stuff. It wouldn't have made sense to any of you. So I want you to think about what might an election look like 20 years from now if we carry on down the same path, because this is the story. Elections are increasingly not about having a big public debate where everyone thrashes out the ideas in some common space, which is what we hope them to be, but a question of data science and the extent to which you can just find and isolate those particular characteristics about key voters and pull their emotional strings in such a way as to just about tip you over the edge in one election or another. And that's a problem. And the reason that's a problem is because things like this. I don't know if any of you have a smart fridge. or a smart coffee machine, or a smart baby monitor, or smart clothes, smart shoes, smart TVs, smart cars. We are, of course, engaged in a mass craze of connectivity. We're putting everything onto the internet. We're chipping up all of our devices, and there'll be many wonderful benefits to doing this, I am sure. But at the same time, and by the way, if you do, and when you do have a smart fridge, because one day it will be more expensive to buy a non-smart fridge, and it will be the preserve of the rich and famous. Oh, God, no, I don't have a smart fridge. No. I've got a 1950s fridge. It barely works. It's wonderful. But when you do have your smart fridge, one day, unfortunately, you're going to open this thing up and some Ukrainian hacker's going to have put some ransomware on this. And if you want cold milk, you're going to have to pay 1 Bitcoin to get it. And you'll probably do it as well, because you need that milk. But of course, all of this is generating vast volumes of data, exponentially so. And of course, is it not obvious that politicians are going to be desperate to understand what you've been eating? Because perhaps what you've been eating has some kind of bearing on how you might vote. So we're going to be collecting, or we're going to know, for example, that you guys eat at 7 p.m. And we know that about 6:30 p.m., because we've looked at your social posts, you're using slightly more charged, emotional, angry language because you're hungry. And we know that people who use charged emotional language because they're slightly hungry are marginally more open to messages from people who are tough on law and order. And so at 6:30 p.m., as you open your fridge to get your chicken Kiev, Jacob Rees-Mogg's going to pop up on this screen with a personalized message to you and you alone, based not only on your dietary habits, but also on everything that you've done that day. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but is it really any more ludicrous than trying to explain Cambridge Analytica to somebody 20 years ago? I don't think so. I think this is going to be the future of our elections. And try to imagine, if you will, in 20 years' time, a voter who is coming into an election for the first time. Because my first election was 1997. And try to imagine how much data there might be collected about an 18-year-old in 2040. All the YouTube videos that they've been watching aged between 0 and 5. I mean, perhaps even the gurgles that were collected by the smart baby monitor. All of which is going to be fed into some kind of predictive model to calculate what really makes them tick and target them and them alone. And I'm pretty confident that even within 10 years, every single person in this room will be receiving a completely different and personalized message to everybody else. So millions of different messages for each person or for millions of different voters. The question is, how are we going to run an election that people can trust, that people have faith in, that people believe can be properly monitored, in a world where every single individual receives a personalized message through their smart fridge that they and they alone can see, and that is built on 20, 30, 40 years worth of data profiling? That's the question for us when we're thinking about Cambridge Analytica and what does it mean. And to me, we're still obviously some way from figuring that out, but 20 years is going to come round pretty damn quick, because already the sorts of techniques that are being used are far better than they were just 5 years ago. So this is what the question is. And when you actually think about it, it's not just about who won and who lost an election. It's about whether or not we trust in the process by which elections take place. I'm fairly sure, for example, that had Donald Trump lost the 2016 election, he would have been saying, but you know that that Clinton lot, they were cheating. Do you know how much data they were collecting about you? Do you know they were doing micro-targeted adverts? Do you know they were using Google to try to work out your... And everyone would have said, oh my goodness me, this is unbelievable. Because it's very hard for anyone to believe that the regulators that we have, the people that are in charge of checking this content, are able to properly monitor it, it's going to get easier for everybody to accuse everybody else of cheating all the time. And then there's a question of accountability. I mean, if politicians are capable of sending unique, dynamic, personalized messages to millions of different people, each one being slightly different. How do you hold a politician to account in that world if they are making different promises to different people and no one can really verify it? And what about when it comes to dynamic machine-generated adverts? Because that's where this is heading. We're going to use machines to automatically create adverts that's based on all of this profiling data and what's going to really make you tick emotionally and move you. Unfortunately, those machines might actually work out that it's the basest, vilest, most divisive content that actually will mobilize people to vote for them. And based on the experience of the last few years, I wouldn't entirely rule that out. So what's that going to do to the quality of our political debate once we start having machines generate this content? And then, of course, there's this question of psychographics, and you might have heard about this, because this is one of the things that apparently Cambridge Analytica did. Which was to try to work out everybody's unique personality profile based on something called an Ocean score. Ocean is, everyone has a personality that can apparently be measured based on 5 key domains of your personality: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And if anybody filled in any of those Facebook surveys that were going around a couple of years ago asking what type of personality type am I, then you are to blame. Because what you probably didn't realize is you were filling in a standardized psychographic survey to work out your Ocean score, those personality domains I just said, cross-reference that against your Facebook likes, and then build a model to work out the relationship between your personality and your Facebook likes, and then extend that model to everybody who's on Facebook. And that's what they did. So we had a kind of Ocean score for every citizen. The problem for Cambridge Analytica was I don't think they really used it, and I don't think at the moment it actually works. But I do think in 15 or 20 years' time, it probably will work. We will be able to generate meaningful insights about people's unique personalities, how narcissistic they are, how open they are, how agreeable they are, and then tailor adverts to those personality profiles. And every single person here, I've been speaking to you, Dave, I know you're a very neurotic person, so you're scoring high on the neurotic thing. You're going to get a special advert that's targeted to you about your personality, and it's going to play on your fears about gun control or whatever it happens to be. And Herb's going to get a very different one, and so on for all of us. And is that really an election, or is that really about a data science that's just trying to pull on a personality thing that you don't even understand because you don't even know how this model's been created? So this is the future. The question, therefore, for all of us, to me, is how do we run an election in such a world where these ads are coming at you through Facebook so we can trust them? And I've got a little word here on my sheet that says solutions. And I've got a minute. Well, the good news is, it's going to be people like you in this room that are going to come up with the solutions to this, not me. But one thing that I think is certainly worth considering, so I'll finish on a slightly more positive note, is that we can solve these problems. We have to update the rules and the regulations that we use. We're going to have to build rules into this so that people trust the way elections are run. And the good news is, I actually think some of this might be fairly simple. We have an election law that's really built for a world of TV and billboard adverts, where everyone can see what's going on. And we're moving to a very different world. So we need to make sure the rules that we have reflect that. So the simplest thing actually is we're going to need some decent technology and a bit of law that says every single advert, every personalized profile, every targeted ad that each person receives, and we don't care whether it's 500 million over the course of an election, they are going to have to be published for everybody else to check. So everyone knows what everyone else sees, everyone knows how people are targeted. It will allow journalists to figure things out. It will allow all of us to have a much more rich public political debate, and that's going to require new rules, new legislation, but also new technology that can help us. So while technology is causing us some problems at the moment, I think new smart technology is going to help us solve some of these problems, and if we can do that, then in 20 years' time, I'll be back here on the stage saying, oh, that was all we fixed all of that. Here's another load of problems, though. So there's always going to be something. And thank you all very much for listening.